So we often go into meetings without any preparation, but also without any artifact. So we even don't have an object of discussion. We go in there and randomly talk oftentimes. And I discovered when I was in the same situation years ago, when I was like jumping from meeting to meeting, that I took like notes and put my thoughts together always in like visualizations. And when I mean visualizations, I don't mean like nice pictures, and I can't draw. I'm really bad, even failing with basic stick figures. But I can put like thoughts on sticky notes or in boxes, connect them with a couple of arrows, and make sense out of this.
Hello and welcome to episode 191 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts, along with strategies for success. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on Monday morning. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review or a rating. That would mean a lot to me and help others find the show. Tell a friend about the podcast. Help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. Christoph Steinlehner is a product management coach. He helps product managers and leaders who feel stuck in their work, caught up in endless detailed discussions, and struggling to facilitate between different perspectives. Christoph's unique approach externalizes perspectives through visual mapping to facilitate discussions and align decisions. All right. Well, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Christoph. It's so good to have you on today.
Thank you, David. It's amazing to be here. Thank you for having me here, and I'm looking forward to talk about meetings and how to make them more inclusive and more enjoyable for also introverts.
Yeah. And when I heard about the work you're doing, that's what drew me to. Yeah, I got to have you on the podcast because as an introvert, I have a lot of great ideas and they're clear to me. But I know that I need to make them, clear to others. And we're going to get into all that. Let's start with just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you're doing the work you're doing now.
Yeah, so right now I'm working as a product management coach and consultant. But of course, I didn't start my career in this. I originally started in web development and web design, and then doubled down on the design part. So I worked many years in different design roles for interactive exhibitions, but then also a lot for digital products. And in there, I slowly moved into product management. So now for many years, I worked as a product manager and product leader. Did that often also then in interim roles. And there, a huge part was then coaching, teaching, and I enjoyed that so much that I'm now focusing completely on this term for the last couple of years.
All right. So you talk a lot about meetings and visually mapping things. What are you seeing in general is going on in our current meeting culture?
Yeah. So when I work with my clients, and I also hear that like from friends, colleagues, from everybody, that our meeting culture is often meeting after meeting, and the result of a meeting is like, okay, when can we meet again? Because we didn't really come to a point. We did just like randomly discuss something, went into a rabbit hole. We had like misunderstandings and things. And then in the meetings itself, of course, it's just talking is a format which works for some people, especially people who can like be spontaneously eloquent and convincing. And then also, of course, we have like the whole notion of like egos and authority meetings and the presentation mode and like all these things. I think nothing I'm just stating now should be a surprise, but it's tricky to come out of this mode, as I've seen.
Yeah, and I bet almost everybody listening can relate to what you're saying, with too many meetings, ineffective meetings, all
Yeah.
that. So, how can we communicate better and make meetings better?
So the first thing is to start to change a little bit the format. So we often go into meetings without any preparation, but also without any artifact. So we even don't have an object of discussion. We go in there and randomly talk oftentimes. And I discovered when I was in the same situation years ago, when I was like jumping from meeting to meeting, that I took like notes and put my thoughts together always in like visualizations. And when I mean visualizations, I don't mean like nice pictures, and I can't draw. I'm really bad, even failing with basic figures. But I can put like thoughts on sticky notes or in boxes, connect them with a couple of arrows, and make sense out of this. And as soon as I started to bring this into conversations, the dynamic changed. So I'm now, like for years now, work a lot in meetings with the tool of visual maps and really supporting the conversation with this and anchoring the conversation around visual maps.
Yeah. And so largely this is an audio podcast, so we're talking about visual things. So just
Yeah.
right up front, tell the listeners how they can get a preview of what we're talking about. So they might even want to look at that now.
Yeah. So I think we will talk a little bit about the mapper method I developed. And there is a small guide to the mapper method. It's currently in preview mode. So it's free, and you can reach out to me at best via LinkedIn and just hit me up, and I will send you the PDF and you can follow through. It has a small example in there which illustrates like how the method works and how you can integrate this in your usual daily work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most everybody, we're visual. I was in a meeting where there weren't any visuals and there was a lot of confusion and we were talking circles around each other because we
Hmm.
weren't really on the same page.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. So the secret is a little bit to really write it on the wall. And I think that the funny thing is I think most of us enjoyed some workshop. We worked in some group settings where we structured our thoughts and we looked at things on the wall and went back and forth. But then we go back into our day-to-day meetings and we lose this. We completely lose like this approach of true collaboration in a meeting instead of just sitting around a table and talking to each other.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about your mapper method. How did you come up with it?
So the first time I think I discovered really doing this deliberately was a few years ago. I was working at educational tech company. They wanted to change their business model. So they brought me in. They wanted to change from single license sales. So they sold their products just one by one. And of course, they wanted to sell it to classes, to school, and also want to go into a subscription business. And the idea was, okay, it's pretty clear what we want to sell. We already know it's working. It should be easy to integrate this technically. So we just have to change a little bit the shop and have to change a little bit in the licensing. It should be easy. This was like how I got into this process. And then exactly what we all know happened. I went from person to person. I worked with around 10 teams, and we talked for an hour. I came out with more questions than answers. And I had to schedule another meeting. I did group meetings, and it was like horrible. It was really like I was at some point like, okay, this will never be done because I have no
Wow.
clue. But what I did is I mapped the whole customer journey. So from the customers learn about the product until they activate it and use the product. And I added my notes from this meeting to this, but this was like my notes. And as like with a design background, I thought like, okay, it's a method I use. Nobody will understand. It doesn't work for anybody else. But at some point I shared the thingy by accident, more or less. And suddenly our conversation changed because people could look at the thing and be, so you know that here this technical system is involved, but that's wrong. You're completely off the charts here. That's a different team. You have to talk to them. And in here, it could be way easier. You have like a wrong impression here. And we suddenly focused on talking about the thing instead of about I asked questions. People couldn't understand exactly what I was up to. They didn't have the context I had in my head. So I brought more or less my whole context and started to discuss about this. And with that, we pretty quickly could identify what the clear next steps are and where we have to investigate, where we can also prototype already and things like that. This was really the game changer for me.
So you started out just doing your own preparation work.
Exactly. And more or less by accident, it came to this. And after this job, I started to work like that. I started really to bring into every conversation my current state of mind, my current visualizations of this. And that's also how the Mapper method developed.
And then, so now how do you use it with others?
Yeah, so I often train it. So bring people to use it and we go through the steps together. So the steps of the Mapper methods are pretty simple. They follow usual product development work. So the first step is to clarify yourself, to clarify your thoughts, because as long as it's in our head, we trick ourselves. So we first map out whatever we know, what we assume, and then we go into interactions with our colleagues in a meeting setting, for example, and get their perspective. So instead of trying to convince somebody, we're asking for their feedback, we're asking for their input, what we got wrong, what is like an alternative to my view, what's their perspective. And we also work in usually like cross-functional teams. So we have technical perspective, from marketing perspective, we have a sales perspective, and so on and so on. And together then we point out the assumptions. So we look at the thing and see like, okay, here we are not sure, or this looks like a risky endeavor. We should do something about that. And that's exactly the next step. So make a small plan and act on it. Really identify the next actions, because oftentimes we have the situation that we just have too many options in front of us. And looking at a map, it's pretty clear often, okay, what's the first thing we should do? And then we go out, evaluate for the insight, like test something, go deeper into research. And with that insights generated, we reflect on that and improve our map. So the map is not the thing, it's just the anchor to steer through the process.
But it functions as a guide, right? It's instead of people just picking different rabbit holes to go down, it kind of keeps people on track, it sounds like.
Exactly. And it's so easy because you can like just point at a thing. As soon as somebody gets into like a deeper discussion, you can ask them to, okay, can you locate this on our map? And you pretty quickly discover also, if you get like a lot of information at a point, that it's getting obvious that you might maybe discussing something which is not really relevant at the moment.
Yeah.
Because you're visualizing it and you're putting it out there and it gets obvious.
So what kind of tools can you use to make a map?
So you can be pretty easy if you're in an office setting, just take a bunch of sticky notes,
So physical sticky notes.
Physical sticky notes on a wall, hands, and you're done.
Nope.
Oftentimes we are now in virtual settings, so you can use a virtual whiteboard, which I often use. There are tools like Miro, Mural, FigJam. There are like endless selection of tools. In the end, you need to draw boxes or put virtual stickies on a wall, maybe an arrow between, and write something on it. It's not about the tool. It's really about the technique and the method.
Yeah. And I mean, some projects can be pretty extensive. How do you make it so that all the boxes can be seen in an extensive project, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so in the virtual whiteboard, you can pretty easily zoom. In physical scenario, you walk back and forth more or less, zoom like physically.
Yeah.
And of course, it gets messy. And that's also the point because your work is often messy, and that's all right. And seeing this also helps you to concentrate. So if you see you're going into a way too much detail, it gets obvious because you map it out. And if you have like no space left anymore, you probably are at some deep point where you either discard like the high level view a little bit, or you see that, okay, we are way too much into detail. We should zoom out again, also in our conversations.
Yeah. And so we're kind of talking about this, but how does this help
Hmm.
people get to common ground?
The funny thing is that as soon as you put something out and talk about the thing instead, talking to each other, it gets easier to get to the shared picture because when we talk to each other, it's pretty quickly that we go into a confrontational mode. So
Right?
somebody is like attacking my perspective, and I automatically, it's human that we start to defend it. We're not rationalizing about it, we start to defend. And as soon as it's external, we can talk about the thing on the wall and it gets less emotional. And also we can present alternative views and put them next to each other and discuss them. And that's pretty hard to do in our brains to have like a couple of items and start to discuss them in our brains.
So it becomes less personal. It's not about your idea, but it's about what needs to happen.
Exactly, exactly. And usually you have like a common goal. And if you don't have a common goal, coming to this situation of conflict is healthy because you have to work through this. There is no way around. You can't just postpone it, which is most of the time not the best way to do it because you have the conflict emerges at a way later stage.
Yeah. So I guess maybe before the first meeting, when you're preparing your map,
Hmm.
are you having a lot of conversations in advance with other, one-on-ones or
So there's usually you have some idea about the situation. You get like in digital products, you get some requests from users, you have some input from users, you have like some people told you like what they're expecting and so on and so on. We have already something in our brain, and I urge people to start to put that out and discover also like their open questions because usually they have open questions and also call them out in their model they're visualized. So it's totally fine if there's like a couple of question marks in between. And then I can come back together in a group or I can go one-on-one, depends a little bit on the situation, to get like a clearer picture, to come to the shared understanding, because that's our goal before like going into really deep actions and making some conclusions. First, really make obvious the different perspectives and come to this shared perspective.
yeah, so are you changing your map on the fly, like in
Yeah.
the meeting? Are you whether it's actual sticky notes or whether it's your virtual whiteboard, you're changing it as you go through the meeting?
Yeah, that's a really important point. So that the thing should be always moldable. You should always change it. It should never be that I did the thing and I'm now presenting it and please nobody touch it. It's it's really the documentation of your conversation, more or less. It's really a back and forth, and that's the nice thing about a low effort tool, that you can quickly like move a couple of boxes around, can quickly make a comment next to it, and so on. It's really like working on a piece to come together about like, okay, that's what we mean together.
Yeah, so it's a work in progress rather than maybe giving
Yeah,
PowerPoint presentation like here's how it is versus we're going to collaborate and work on this together.
exactly, exactly. And that's also like one thing we see often in meetings is PowerPoint presentations. And power presentations are great for convincing people and selling something. It's really a communication tool to get my point across against all barriers. But in 90% of our work interaction, that's not what we are after. We need the input from other people. We need the interaction with other people. And a PowerPoint is really one of the worst tools to do this, because nobody will jump up and be, oh, on slide this, the third point is wrong. And then you go into edit mode and change it. And it's like, it's not the tool for this.
No, you're usually not changing a PowerPoint during a meeting.
Exactly.
So how does this method help bring maybe someone that's sometimes people join projects after they've already started?
Hmm. Yeah, so it's also like as I described in my case back when I was at this company, it was a great tool to speed people up because like we already had like hours and hours of conversations about the thing, and repeating everything would be probably like a 2 hour. I explain everything to you and you most likely won't keep it in your head. But I can walk somebody through this map, explain the point, and they also can then take their own time and have like another look at it and have like on the afternoon, take an hour and really look through this, maybe comment on that, write down their questions, which is still unclear for them. So it's an artifact which is in our conversation, but also in our thinking time, quite helpful to, yeah, to reference and to look at.
So, I mean, obviously it seems like this method would save time and save money.
Hmm.
Is that the case? Are there other benefits?
Yeah, on one hand, that's the case because you get into discussions way earlier. So you save time often in the long term. Maybe it's a little bit more effort to get started. It's a little bit more the effort to bring everybody together to map, but you have this clear picture. You don't repeat yourself again and again in follow-ups. And also you often discover like easier solutions, easier conclusions than what you would have in talking. And I'm sure like I've seen a lot of people in projects where they are in some like analysis paralysis. So they're talking again, the same topic again and again. It's getting repeated. It's getting like, ah, we are unsure, we have to do more, and so on and so on. It's unconclusive. And with a map, you can pretty quickly define like, okay, that's the main leverage point. This is, for example, where a customer needs to go through the step to come to even like this later steps in the process. So we can first like concentrate on the first step, prototype this, test this with users, and get some insights there before we try to figure out everything in endless discussions.
Yeah. Yeah, there definitely can be endless discussions. So, we'll probably might still need to have many meetings, but it could be many less meetings, right?
Exactly. There are less meetings and more productive meetings also. That's really the key. There is way more output of these meetings and way more clarity.
Yeah, and as I said in the beginning, I in many different ways, I've been trying to share my ideas more visually. Again, I'm an introvert, I'm a deep thinker. I have
Mm.
ideas nonstop, but you know, people can't see that. And so to try in various ways to make ideas more visual, share more visuals. Why is it so important that we share things visually with people?
It just has a completely different bandwidth. So when we're talking, it's quite narrow. We can put word after word. It's linear. When we visualize, we can explore things. We can see connections which are completely hidden if we are in a linear talking track. So looking at a picture and discussing this picture really sparks new ideas, and it has just much more bandwidth. So we can, everybody knows of this. We look at a picture, we can process this in seconds and know what it's about. Getting like explain the picture. Yeah.
and and know that we're talking about the same thing. Again, sometimes I think when we're not using visual representations, we don't have a shared understanding.
Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah. It's so common that people talk and talk and talk and go out of a meeting and are like, ah, yeah, finally I made my point. And they go into the next interaction with the same person and there's like, oh no, they completely understood something different.
Yeah. So if someone hasn't been doing something like this and this is new to them, how
Yeah.
do they get started?
So r- really write down your thoughts and order them. Oftentimes, if you think about a customer journey or something like that, start with their final point. So start with, I have an example in the Mapper guide about the tea timer. The final step for the customer is they have a cup of tea. And then think about the first step. So what do they have to do as a first thing? And it's probably open this tea timer app. And then you fill out the steps in between. Then you have your first overview, and then you can add more detail or remove some detail. And then you can add like other layers of information. But it's pretty easy to just put what's in your head and bring this in some order. Maybe you connect it also with errors. So in this guide you can get from me, there's like one example of using two techniques, the service blueprint and the assumption map, but there are many more. So there are also like tree visualizations, things like that. All of them you saw before, all of them are quite natural. So it's not a crazy science.
So as the person leading the meeting, would you develop the start of a map ahead of time and share it ahead of time, or how does that work?
Yeah, that often works best. So especially if you using this newly, it's easier to have some time and think through your perspective and then come into this and challenge this perspective with others. If you're more like used to work this way, you can also approach this as a group. But facilitating this and you're new to this can get a little bit like too much in the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. So back to the beginning when we said that, you definitely saw some issues with the meeting culture.
Hmm.
How would you sum up that this is really helping with those issues?
It really gets you out of this one person talks and everybody's listening because everybody look at the map and people can point things out. And it helps also a little bit like with the power dynamics because it's way easier to critique the thing instead of critique your boss in a meeting, for example. So even if your boss put out some idea there is no name to next to the sticky. And if like 10 minutes after you say like, ah, okay, but I have a different idea here, it doesn't get personal. It's just like you get on the thing. So with that, you have an output, you go out of a meeting, and even if you know you have to go deeper and do more, your step is saved. It's a little bit like a save button. You go out of the meeting, and whatever you talked about is in the map. And then you can revisit this and go really into deciding mode what to do next with the thing.
Yeah. And so, how is that better? Most meetings, people are taking notes, right? And you might have
Mm.
a bullet points of
Mm.
things that were covered. How is this better than that?
So I never saw a meeting, and you might have, David, where like people come into the next meeting with their notes and
Okay.
add to these notes and
Yeah.
like enrich the picture. So we have oftentimes notes, probably nobody reads that. Maybe now AI reads it and makes a short version of it to remind you roughly about what was talked the last time, but it's always like a huge compression. It's always like not the actual progress. It doesn't show your product development, your process, whatever you're talking about. It doesn't represent the thing. It's really abstracted. And a map is also, of course, an abstraction, but usually way nearer to your actual conversation.
Yeah, because the bullet points aren't put together in the nice puzzle that, the project is. It doesn't connect all the pieces. It's just, here's this thing we talked about and this thing, but it doesn't show how it all fits together.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And and also this like this maps, if you see them, it's a little like and you remember the conversation you had about it. So there we had this discussion. We came to this conclusion. It's captured here in a long like meeting notes, and you have then 20 of them after 20 meetings. Where do you find like this? When did we have what discussion?
Yeah, yeah, and again, it's really becoming clear for me that those notes don't fit, in any kind of process
Yeah,
or method or anything like that.
yeah,
But that's what a lot of people are doing.
yeah. And I think they're coming just from a documentation standpoint. So if you want to have like documentation of something and you need to have a protocol, you need to have like as you are sitting in a criminal case, yeah, of course, then maybe a protocol and meeting notes make sense, but doesn't really make sense as a work artifact most of the time.
Yeah, yeah. So, like I said, this is very helpful. I think we all need to have, you know, a visual that we're all working on, that we're collaborating on. We can get to common ground. This has been a great conversation. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that we haven't?
Well, I just encourage people to start to try new methods. So I think mapping is really like something that's so low barrier. You can just start it and really encourage people to try things if they're frustrated with their current situation. And oftentimes it's the small changes which make a breakthrough.
Yeah, absolutely. And so again, people can reach out to you on LinkedIn. I'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes, and you can
Yeah,
give them a preview of your mapper method.
exactly. Yeah, thank you so much. Please reach out. Also, always happy to like get feedback on this stuff, discuss your situation when you think that's totally not fitting. 99% it fits, but I'm always curious to hear more cases and also develop my methods further.
All right. Thanks again, Christoph. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts and links to social media channels. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there's now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the 4-letter Myers-Briggs code,
And you can also have the option of purchasing the full report if you'd like to learn more. I'll add a link to the show notes. So many great things about being an introvert, and we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.